Middle School Math Man here with the third video on domain and range. I'm going to call these kind of my special cases. The last three examples are all shapes on a graph. The specific points aren't there, but the graphs aren't continuing on and on forever and ever with the arrows. So my first example here. My domain, those are my x values, so I'm concerned with the x-axis, which I'm highlighting in red. So again, we're going to have our set builder notation. So I'm going to write the frame first. So on the x-axis, the furthest left point is right here, which I'm highlighting in red. And that is at x equals -4. So that means that x is going to be greater than or equal to -4. -4 is the furthest left point on this graph. Now, I'm highlighting in red the furthest right point. So that is the greatest point on the x-axis on this graph, and that is at 3. Now notice, this circle is open. The circle down here at x equals -4 was closed, but this one is open. So that means that that point is not included. So x is going to be less than 3. 3 is the greatest point on the x-axis, and it's open, so it's not included. So x has to be less than 3. Moving on to our range. We're looking at the y-axis, which I'm highlighting in yellow. So let's do my set builder frame. So the lowest point on this graph is right there, which I'm circling in yellow. Notice how it is open. So it's not going to be equal to -5. Y is just going to be greater than -5. The open circle tells us that that point is not included in the answer. So y has to be greater than -5. And the highest point on here, or the greatest point, is what I just circled in yellow. And that is at y equals 5. So y has to be less than 5. Again, open circle, so it's not, that answer is not included. Finally, for is it a function or not? Vertical line test. So move your pencil from the left to the right. So just for example, if I draw that line in there, that actually hits at 1, 2, 3, 4 points. So that is obviously not going to be a function. Second example, I have a pentagon here. So my domain, again, my x values. So I'm focusing on the x-axis first. The furthest left point on this graph is right there, and that is at x equals -3. So x has to be greater than or equal to -3. I don't have an open circle there, so it can be -3. Finally, the greatest point is at x equals 3 on this graph. So x is going to be less than or equal to 3. So now looking at my range. It's my y-axis. So my lowest point here is at -4. And my highest point is at 3. So y has to be greater than or equal to -4. And y has to be less than or equal to 3. Looking at the vertical line test, let's say if we're looking on this yellow line here, it hits at 2 points, so that is not going to be a function. Here I have a circle. So my domain, again, my x values. The furthest left point is at -2, and the furthest right point is at +2. So x has to be greater than or equal to -2. -2 is the furthest left point. And x has to be less than or equal to +2. So now I'm going to look at the range. The lowest point on this graph is at the origin. So y has to be greater than or equal to 0. And the highest point on this graph is at 4. So y has to be less than or equal to 4. Looking at the vertical line test, if I drew that line, for example, it's going to hit at more than 1 point, so no, that is not a function. Last example, I have a triangle. So first, let's look at the domain, which is my x-axis. So the furthest left points are, anything on that line there, and that is at x equals -3. So x has to be greater than or equal to -3. And the furthest right point is right there. So the greatest point is going to be x equals 3. So x has to be less than or equal to +3. Now lastly, let's look at the range. So my y-axis, the least point on the range, the lowest point on this graph is right there that I highlighted in green. And that is going to be at -2. So here I'm going to just write my frame. So y has to be greater than or equal to -2, because that's the lowest point. The highest point on this graph is y equals 4. So y has to be less than or equal to 4. And finally, if I drew this line in there, you'll be able to tell that it hits at multiple points, so no, that is not a function.